Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. Today, we're talking about scotomas. You know, those weird blind spots that can pop up in your vision. We've got some really interesting research on them, all about what they are, what causes them, and even how to deal with them. So think of this deep dive as your crash course on scotomas.
It's funny because we all actually have a natural blind spot right where the optic nerve meets the retina, but our brains are so good at filling in the gaps we don't even notice it. But a scotoma, that's different. It's like an abnormal blind spot, and it can be a sign that something else is going on.
So it's not just like, oh, there's a blank spot, end of story.
Yeah.
This article talks about scotomas as all kinds of visual disturbances, not just blank spots. I mean, some people see shimmering lights, others get like blurry patches. Some even say it's like those floaters we all see sometimes.
Oh, yeah, and that's actually helpful for figuring out what's causing them. Take those shimmering lights, for example. They're often called scintillating scotomas, and they're often linked to migraines. It's like the brain's visual system is getting, well, a little scrambled for a bit.
So the type of scotoma can give us a clue about what's causing it. That's interesting.
Exactly. Like, imagine someone has a central scotoma, meaning the blind spot's right in the middle of their vision. That's going to be way more disruptive than a paracentral scotoma, which is more off to the side. And the causes for those two, probably totally different.
This is starting to feel like a detective story. But before we go too deep into causes, I gotta ask, how urgent is this? Like if someone notices any of these visual weirdness, how soon should they see a doctor?
When it comes to your vision, it's always better to be safe than sorry. Any sudden change, get it checked out. Even if it's nothing serious, catching things early is key.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's talk about those potential something else situations. This article lists a ton of possible causes for scotomas. It goes from everyday things like migraines all the way to serious stuff like macular degeneration.
And getting why those things cause scotomas can teach us a lot about how vision works. Take macular degeneration. It affects the macula, the central part of the retina, which is what gives us that sharp central vision. So no wonder it often leads to central scotomas.
No. So it's not just a random blind spot popping up. It's connected to damage in a specific part of the eye.
Exactly. Same thing with diabetic retinopathy. High blood sugar can mess with those tiny blood vessels in the retina, and then bam, you've got those blurry patches or blind spots.
Wow. So these scotomas are kind of like warning signs. They might be telling us that something's up with our eyes or even our overall health.
Exactly. And doctors can use the type of scotoma, along with other symptoms, to start piecing together what might be going on.
It's amazing how much we can learn from something as simple as a blind spot. So we've talked about how the type of scotoma matters, but what about where it is? Does the location give us clues too?
Oh, absolutely. A junctional scotoma, for instance, that affects where the optic nerve and the brain meet. That could point to a problem with the optic nerve itself, or even something in the brain. Totally different situation than a scotoma caused by, say, a retinal migraine.
Okay, so the type, the location, plus any other symptoms, that all helps the doctor get a clearer picture. But I'm guessing it's not always a straightforward diagnosis, is it?
Yeah, you're right. It can be tricky. It often takes a deep dive into the patient's medical history, some special eye exams, and sometimes even imaging scans to really nail down the cause.
Wow. Well, this deep dive has certainly opened my eyes to how complicated these seemingly simple blind spots can be. We've covered so much already, from the different ways scotomas can look to the huge range of things that can cause them. And I bet there's even more to learn.
Oh, definitely. We've just scratched the surface. Coming up next, we'll talk about who's most likely to get scotomas and what they can do to protect their vision.
Okay, so we know these scotomas. They might seem like simple blind spots, but they can be pretty complicated. And they can be a sign of a whole bunch of different things. But who's most likely to get them? Is it just bad luck? Or are there certain things that make some people more prone to these visual disturbances?
Well, that's a great question, and it's definitely something this article digs into. There are a bunch of factors that play a role, and understanding those factors can really help people be proactive about their eye health.
So let's break it down. What are some of the things that might make someone more likely to experience a scotoma?
Well, one of the biggest ones is age. As we get older, our risk for all sorts of eye conditions goes up, things like macular degeneration, and those conditions often come with a higher chance of developing scotomas.
That makes sense. But it's not just about age, right? The article mentioned a bunch of other things like diabetes, high blood pressure, even a history of migraines.
You got it. Anything that affects blood flow and circulation can have a big impact on our eyes. For example, with diabetes, high blood sugar can damage those tiny blood vessels in the retina, and that can lead to diabetic retinopathy, which, like we talked about before, is a common cause of scotomas.
And I'm guessing high blood pressure would have a similar effect, restricting blood flow to the eyes and potentially causing damage.
Exactly. And it's not just about pre-existing conditions. Lifestyle choices like smoking can also increase your risk. Smoking's bad news for blood vessels all over your body, including in your eyes. So it makes you more susceptible to all kinds of eye problems, scotomas included.
It's crazy how connected our overall health is to our eye health. So if someone has a scotoma and they also smoke, that's a big red flag for their doctor.
Absolutely. It could mean that their lifestyle is contributing to the problem. And changing those habits might be a really important part of managing the scotoma.
Okay, so we've got age, existing conditions, and lifestyle factors all in the mix. But the article also mentioned something about mental health, which I thought was interesting. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Sure, we're learning more and more about how mental health conditions, like anxiety and depression, can affect our eyes, too. Chronic stress can mess with blood flow and hormone levels, which can impact those delicate structures in the eye.
So it's not just about physical health. Our mental well-being matters too.
Exactly. It shows just how important it is to take a holistic approach to health. Our physical and mental well-being are totally interconnected.
You mentioned earlier that early detection is key when it comes to scotomas. But what are some of the warning signs, those red flags that should send someone straight to the doctor? Because I'm guessing a simple blurry spot isn't always the whole story.
Nope, definitely not. A scotoma by itself might not be an emergency, but it can be a sign of something more serious, especially if there are other symptoms.
Well, you talked about confusion as a red flag earlier. Why is that so important?
Confusion, especially if it comes on suddenly, can be a sign of a neurological issue, like a stroke, or even a mini stroke, which is called a transient ischemic attack. And those conditions can definitely affect vision and cause scotomas.
So if someone has a scotoma and suddenly becomes confused, that's a 911 situation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Every second counts in those cases. Other red flags include sudden, severe headaches, especially if it's a different kind of headache than you usually get, as well as weakness, numbness, or trouble speaking. Those could all be signs of something serious happening in the brain.
Got it. So those are the call 911 red flags. But what about when the scotoma seems more isolated, like it's just a visual thing without any other scary symptoms? What then?
Well, like we said, any sudden change in vision is worth a trip to the eye doctor. They'll be able to examine your eyes, figure out the type and location of the scotoma, and try to pinpoint what's causing it.
Okay, so let's say you've been to the eye doctor, they've run all the tests, and they've figured out what's causing the scotoma. What's next?
The next step is coming up with a plan to manage it. And that plan really depends on the cause. Sometimes treating the underlying condition takes care of the scotoma too. For example, if high blood pressure is the culprit, getting that under control with medication and lifestyle changes might also improve or even eliminate the scotoma altogether.
But I imagine some scotomas are permanent. What happens then?
That's a good point. Some scotomas, especially those caused by serious conditions like macular degeneration or a stroke, might be permanent. But that doesn't mean there's nothing you can do. There are all sorts of tools and strategies that can help people live comfortably with scotomas, even permanent ones.
I'm curious to hear more about these tools. What kind of things are we talking about?
Well, it really depends on the type of scotoma, where it is, and the person's individual needs and lifestyle. For people with central scotomas, the ones that affect their direct line of sight, magnifying devices can be super helpful for reading and other close-up tasks.
So instead of struggling to see through that central blind spot, they can use a magnifier to make the text bigger and easier to read.
Exactly. It can make a huge difference for people who love to read but are having trouble with the central scotoma. And it's not just about magnification. Large print books, audiobooks, even text-to-speech software, all of those can be really helpful for staying engaged with the written word.
That's great. It sounds like technology can really empower people to adapt to these visual challenges. What are some other tools people might find useful?
For those with scotomas that affect their peripheral vision, a simple but effective strategy is learning to turn their head more often. It's about being more aware of your surroundings and adjusting your movements accordingly.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like retraining your brain to navigate the world with this new visual landscape.
Exactly. And it's not just about physical adaptations. Living with a scotoma, especially a permanent one, also involves emotional and psychological adjustment.
Yeah, I can imagine it can be pretty tough, practically and emotionally.
It definitely can be. That's why having a good support system, family, friends, healthcare professionals is so important. They can help you navigate the challenges and find the resources you need to thrive.
So it's not just about treating the physical symptoms. It's about addressing the emotional and social aspects of living with a scotoma too.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that scotomas, even though they're primarily visual, can impact many different parts of a person's life.
This deep dive has really highlighted the importance of understanding not only the mechanics of scotomas, but also the human experience that goes along with them. We've talked about risk factors, red flags, the diagnosis process, and now all the ways people can manage and adapt to living with these blind spots. I'm curious, what are your final thoughts on this topic? What has this deep dive revealed to you about how complex vision is and about the remarkable ability of the human brain to adapt?
What I find so fascinating is how these scotomas, these visual glitches, they show us not only how vulnerable our sight is, but also how incredibly resilient our brains are. Our brains are constantly working to compensate, to find new ways to process information and make sense of the world, even when our vision isn't perfect.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It really is amazing, huh? We've been talking about these scotomas all this time, these little glitches in our vision. But what's really sticking with me is how strong they make our brain seem.
Yeah, it's kind of like a contradiction, right?
Yeah.
These blind spots, these missing pieces in what we see, they actually show us how incredible our brains are at adapting.
Yeah. It's like by having these scotomas, we get a better understanding of just how complex vision is
Yeah.
and how hard our brains are working to make sense of the world, even when they're not getting all the information.
And that adaptability, that drive to adjust and compensate, it's not just for vision, it's like a basic part of how our brains work, is what we use to face any challenge, physical, emotional, whatever.
That's a really cool way to think about it. So are we saying that these scotomas, even though they can be annoying, they can also remind us how strong we are, like how we can adapt and overcome things?
Totally. They show us how flexible our brains are, how they can rewire themselves, find new ways to do things. Like they're basically remapping the world based on what they can see. Imagine like your brain is constantly updating its GPS, figuring out how to get around those scotoma roadblocks.
Love that. Like our brains are always looking for detours, rerouting our vision to keep us going. Makes you realize that limitations, even visual ones, don't have to be the end of the story.
Exactly. And we've seen some great examples of that in this deep dive. People with scotomas, even the permanent kind, they can not only adapt, they can thrive. They use tools, they use strategies, and they just keep going.
It really shows the strength of the human spirit,
Yeah.
that ability to be creative, to find new ways to see and experience the world, even when things aren't perfect.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that how we see things, even just physically, it's not fixed. It's fluid. It can change. Our brains are always reevaluating the world, filling in the blanks, making changes based on new information.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave everyone with this thought. If you ever experience a scotoma, don't just see it as a blank spot. See it as like a challenge, a chance to see how amazing your brain is, to find new ways to experience the world, and to really value the gift of sight, even when it's not perfect.
Well said. And remember, knowing more is always better. The more we understand about scotomas, the better we can take care of our vision and help those who are dealing with these visual challenges.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of scotomas. We hope you learned something new and interesting. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those brains of yours sharp.